Hey, welcome to the Social 333 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bentley. Today, my guest is Michael Walsh. Michael, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me here.
Awesome. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
I'm a business consultant. I help people grow companies anywhere from $1 million in revenue up to $20 million in revenue. People come to me, $20 million to start, and then we help them achieve large scale growth, basically for their companies. And it's primarily service-based firms or businesses with a strong service component that's based in the expertise of their people. So as opposed to just a standard service that anybody can do, this is stuff, professional services, skilled trades, training and development companies, all that kind of stuff, those people.
We were talking a little bit off air. This is your book, Freedom by Design, which is real cool. We were talking a little bit off air about entrepreneurs and small business owners and like just milestones they get stuck in. And I was really kind of interested in that because sometimes I get stuck in different milestones. So talk about a little bit about milestones and kind of talk about the danger zones and stuff that you were talking about before.
Okay. Well, when somebody gets into business to start, I need a little closer, sure. When somebody gets into business to start, the first goal everybody has is $1 million. They all want $1 million in revenue. In fact, I had a client that we helped her go from 700,000. In her case, it was in the UK, so it was £1 million. She was at 400,000 pounds. Then she went to 700. We helped her get 700. Then the next year she went to 1.4.
Wow.
Even at 1.4, she wanted £1 million. She had no idea she was already past it.
Wow.
So, but that £1 million, or $1 million, it's the target. But of course, then once somebody hits that milestone, then the next target they hit is usually 2 million. And then, if they hit 2 million, then they want the next milestone for them is 5. And if they hit 5, then the next milestone they want is 10. And of course, if they hit 10, they want to go to 20 and up it goes from there. So although there's not that many people that get from startup up to and past 20 million, it's more established companies that'll do that once you start getting past, say, about 10 million. And what happens is there's these underlying issues. So if you take a look from somebody at $1 million, as you approach 2 million, there's things that just make the business harder for the owners, frankly, and for everybody. And then again, once they get past those issues, then just on the other side of 5 million, they happen again. And then when they're approaching 10 million, they happen again. And then when they're between 12 and 20 million, there's this big chasm where they happen again. Now, it's not the same things happening. It's just dynamics that slow the business down that nobody realizes are getting them. What I find is that entrepreneurs are pretty savvy people. If I can see a problem, I can solve a problem. I can always identify the resources to help and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I find is if they can't see a problem, but they know it exists, they can still solve it. It's the ones that they can't see and they have no idea that it even exists, even when it's got them in their grips. Those are the ones that they have problems with. And so these problems that were beneath business growth at these extra milestones, these are what I call the danger zones. And so, these are just stuff that they're not part of your marketing, operations, finance, all that. It's just underlying issues that people have no idea exist.
Talk to me about some of those issues. Like, what are you seeing? Because I kind of know just off of me, I haven't gotten that big in terms of a business where it's 10 million or 20 million. But I know that I've gotten into different pockets where, the entrepreneur or small business owner just works too much, or they don't hire staff, or they hire, like I have a real estate company, so I hire agents and then I have to train the agents, and then the agents go and do whatever they please or not what I want them to do. And then there's problems with that. Like, tell me some of the problems that you've seen that you go out and speak to these entrepreneurs and small business owners that you try to fix.
Sure. So in the first, during that first million, what happens is, somebody might have anywhere from 5 to 8 people that they hire to actually help them get there. And at that size, what you need is utility players. You need people that can do many things because guess what? There's too much to do and not enough people to go around, and there's just not that much money around. But when you move past that first million and head towards the second million, you actually need to start hiring more specialists. But by the time you're at 14 or 15 people, you're in a situation where you kind of need a manager because you can't do it all yourself. Once you start getting past 8 or 10 people, your single group of people breaks into two groups because it's just normal human dynamics of how we socialize. We can handle somewhere between 8 and 10, but then when it gets past that, we just start naturally breaking into other groups. So that's where bosses usually start looking for a manager to help them. And the person they choose as the manager to help them is probably the most accomplished person that they've got on their team. You know, Maxine is amazing. I trust her. She knows her stuff. She does a better job than anybody else. I literally trust her with my life. She's got to be my manager. Well, what makes Maxine a great manager is not the same thing as what made her a great individual contributor. So her attitude is, well, I already know how to do this. I just need to tell them the way that they need to do this, and then we'll be all set. And first of all, people don't like to be told. Second of all, just because that's what worked for Maxine, somebody with a different style, something else might work for. So the first problem that people run into is, first of all, they haven't got enough specialists at the table before 2 million. And second, it's not like you can afford a bunch. But the second thing is that the people that you brought in as seniors are not brought in as managers because it doesn't feel like you can afford that luxury. So they usually pick the wrong person in the manager's role right off the bat. And I've seen people stumble between about 1.7 and 1.9, and then if they hit 2, then they come right back down the next year because it's just not sustainable at that point in time. So the actual underlying issues, and 2 million is as good a spot as any to talk about it. The underlying issues are, first of all, they've outstripped their structures. I mean, everybody knows that if I have $1 million business, there's no way whatever the systems and structures and processes I have for my little $1 million business are going to work at 10 million. It's a completely different game. Well, guess what? At 2 million, it's enough of a different game that you're outstripping them by then too. But the second thing that you have is you're adding people as you go. So if I'm adding people and I've outstripped my structures, adding people means, like you said, your agents want to do what they want to do, not necessarily what you want them to do. It's like herding cats. That term herding cats refers directly to the real estate industry, right? And so what people then try to do when they've grown past their structures, they try to impose different structures that would literally constrain or corral their people rather than structures that would support them to be at their best, because they're under so much stress associated with trying to actually manage all this stuff that feels like it's out of control. They figured, well, at least I have control over my systems and structures. The common saying is people will come and people will go, but your structures are there to stay. Focus on them. Well, yeah, that's fine at the level of structures, but not quite work so well at the level of people. And so at each of the milestones, it's different structures people are moving past, but at each of the milestones, you're growing the number of people that you're dealing with. And the biggest mistake, again, is people, they're looking at their people like they're the problem and they're trying to constrain them rather than looking at their people like they're actually the way to increase your freedom and arming them with what they need to be at their best.
Really interesting. Increase your freedom. Taking some notes here.
Sure.
For myself. So I've seen a couple different things. Obviously I was in the corporate world. I'll talk about that here in a second. But I was in a company in a brokerage that had over 180 agents, and it was the broker and basically his right hand woman, right? And she hadn't closed a deal in 30 years. And she just knows about, forms and going to do different things. And I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody, but if I needed something, it would be like, oh, well, go call the hotline or go figure it out on your own, basically, or call Monday, to TREC, Texas Real Estate Commission. So it wasn't very helpful. I just needed a yes or no answer.
Right.
I just needed somebody to be like, hey, you're doing it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Or like it's a yes instead of a no. And what happened was the company divided into cliques. It would be like, Chris knows what he's doing, so I'm going to and he's cool, so I'm going to hang out with him. And then like Johnny over there, like he does more than Chris in production, so I'm going to hang out with Johnny. And before you know it, like everybody kind of like broke apart into like little cliques, or all the girls that thought they were cool all hung out with all the other girls that thought they were cool too, right? And before you know it, it was like an island.
Yes.
And if you're not like on the winning team on that island, then you're kind of get booted off of the island at some point. That's kind of what I felt. And then on the flip side of it, when I worked in the corporate world, it was me and you were, we were on the same pod, and you were on the other side of the pod, and you just happened to be there longer than I was, and everybody else got fired or they quit, and it was just you and me, and they had to decide on somebody. And you were a great producer at what you were doing, and I was okay at doing what I was doing, so they chose you.
Right.
But you don't want to manage anybody.
No.
You just want the pay raise.
Well, and a lot of people feel they have to go to management for that pay raise.
Right.
And so they get into jobs they should never be in because of the money. Everything's designed around that. And one of the things that entrepreneurs figure out, well, some do, some leaders, is that there's got to be more than one path to the financial results that people are hoping to get. So if I want to get the big paycheck, I can either do it as a manager, or if I can be an expert specialist, there's got to be a way for me to do that there, because there are people that are really good, that are really loyal, that I want to keep, but my only way to pay them enough to keep them is to put them in management, and I know that they're horrible managers.
Right.
And all the way up through the system that's there. I had to laugh because you were commenting about the real estate industry. So let's call this right-hand person Abigail, okay? Well, here's what's happening to her, okay? She is, she's basically, she handles the thing. She's like this ninja of forms, and she knows where everything is, except everything to her, she gets more and more and more of it. She doesn't get the right hand because they figure, well, Abigail can take care of it. And what happens is that she turns into the house of can't. And so what happens is it's just horrible working with Abigail. And Abigail's, spilling her guts, trying to do what she can, being the best person she can be. And she's so loyal and dedicated, and she's making enemies left, right, and center. And everybody's thinking that she's a bum. And she's not a bum. She's a person that stitches things together. We actually had a situation in New Orleans about that. It was a medical company, and this one woman, okay, we're going to call her Monica. Her boss, Joe, okay, said, so how long have we been working together? And I said, about 5 months now. And he says, I'm still scratching my head. I'm not quite sure what happened. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, Monica used to be the house of can't. Now she's the house of bring it. All of a sudden, my ideas are getting listened to when we're actually growing and things are going really, really well. Well, with that company, we got them from $7 million in revenue to $20 million in about 3 years.
Wow.
And the reason is because we just gave Monica what she needed. And he doesn't know what she needs, and she doesn't even know how to ask for it. She just knows that there's so much coming on that she needs a coping strategy. Whereas, what Joe's thinking is, well, if I need somebody to do something, I give it to Monica. And, of course, he made Monica the boss of a bunch of people. And the truth is she's actually a really good boss. And she was so overwhelmed, she wasn't a very good boss. She was a bad boss. And so it was fascinating to see the things that happen, There's another situation where I have a guy, we'll call him Tim. He was at 700,000 in revenue, and he really wanted to grow. And I was working with him on a different project, but he was sort of tapping my ideas and stuff, while we were working together. And he says, I really want to grow. And I said, well, I'd keep bringing him back to his people. And he'd say, my people, listen, don't talk to me about my people. There's enough of he's frustrated about his people. I just want to grow. And I said, well, you can grow if you want, but you don't think you have freedom now? You're going to lose any freedom you got left if you do that. Unless you change how you're dealing with your people, this is not going to work. And so finally I got his attention, and probably in about a 3-month period, he just listened to what I said and tried a few things that I asked him to do. Okay. All of a sudden, first of all, he had to change out some of his people, but because half the game is whether you got the right people or not.
Right.
But the other half of that, he says, I got my life back. So he went from 700 in 23 to $1 million in 24. He's already tracking over 2.2, and we're building a game plan right now for 10 million for the year after that. So actually that'd be next year. he said when somebody asked him about me, Michael says, or he said, he doubled my income and gave me my time back, and as we speak right now, he's on a cruise with his whole family.
Wow.
First time he's done that, and he's got a big launch coming up next week, but his team is taking care of it. And they said, is there anything for me to do? They're like, no, go enjoy your family. We got this. And he's like, who are these people? And where's
Right.
my team? Because
Right.
they never like that.
Right.
That kind of stuff. So it was fascinating to see. And it's amazing because it's a bunch of little things, but they add up.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm sure like we have our audience is all entrepreneurs, business owners, where you start a company and it starts to grow and you start making money, and
Hmm.
then you are like, okay, well now I'm like the chief of all hats. Like I do the accounting, I do bookkeeping, I do sales, I do lead calls, I do appointments, I do training. You're just like I do HR. Like you do everything, and then you come to a point where you're just exhausted and you're like, look, like I can't do it. Just like you were saying, like that lady was just like, I can't do it anymore. And it's a situation where I think the business owner has to be like, okay, well, I have to, instead of taking all of my profit, I'm going to take less profit and get help that'll free up my time to create more profit with marketing or more sales or whatever it is. Have you seen like a lot of that as well?
All the time. And people think they have to give up a bunch of profit to do that. In fact, there was a woman I dealt with, and she had a small company, an e-learning company down in South Africa, and she had heard about us because we've done stuff with e-learning companies, um, and it turns out the person she had as the manager was just, I mean, they had the equivalent of about $1.5 million in revenue, when you convert the dollars to their currency, but I think it was the rand. Um, she was paying the same amount of money that she needed to pay. The difference is she had the wrong person in the manager spot. We
Oh,
pulled the person out of the manager spot and gave that person more of a specialist role. Took this other person who's already being well paid, it made her basically a team lead and somebody else a team lead, so that they didn't have the full pressure of manager, but they were part of the team. But they were able to give direction. They're just people that care about the people that they work with. And there's those types of people exist. They're not that hard to find,
mm-hmm.
and they were already on the team, and she knew the work that, this one particular one, she knew the work, and it changed everything. So the fear was it would cost her a lot more. And at the end of the day, it didn't cost her a dime. We also had an architecture firm in Vancouver, 3 partners, 30 staff, so 33 in total, 2.8 million gross revenue, and a really healthy net. And they wanted to bring on associates, and they said, we need more managers and stuff, so we'll bring on these associates, but we don't want to meet in our lunch. They figured they had to bring these people on because they were getting a little bit older, and they knew they'd eventually want to retire. But they figured these guys are. It just means our profits are going to go. I said no. I said if somebody's going to actually grow in the position, have them bring in more than they
Right.
take, like that, and we did that. And frankly, their business went from 2.8 million to 9.6 million in 4
Wow.
years.
Wow.
And because we put the right people in the right spots, but really listening for what the sweet spot was for each person, and then building an environment where they could actually work together, where everybody wins. I mean, this stuff sounds like mom and apple pie, like too good to be true stuff. And the truth is, if I wasn't in the middle of it, that's exactly what I'd think. But one of the distinctions I got really clear about was the difference between running your business as if it's a well-oiled machine versus running your business like an intelligent ecosystem. You know, and the biggest difference I found was in a well-oiled machine, a machine is there for the benefit of its owners. Now, I had to laugh because I was talking to a guy, Chris, another Chris, and I said, "You got a car?" He says, "Of course I do." So he told me what kind of car, and I said, "So, for whose benefit is that?" And he says, "Well, it's certainly not for my benefit. It's for my kids, my wife. Everybody takes a car. I don't get a car. In fact, my wife has another car, and she still takes mine. I don't know. She likes it better." And I said, "Okay, fine. So you and your wife and your family, the car is for them." And he's like, "Yeah, okay. So the machine is the car." When you treat a business like a machine, it's people become the cogs in the machine. So the people aren't like your family; they're the co-owners of the car. In fact, they may be the prime owners of your car.
Right.
But when it comes to these people are like the ignition and the steering and the wheels. These people are cogs in a system, and those systems are there for the benefit of the owners. I said in an intelligent ecosystem, it has to be there for the benefit of everybody, not just the owners. So in other words, it's there for the benefit of the owners, but it's also there for the benefit of the clients or customers. It's also there for the benefit of the staff. And then, and not just one group of staff over another. It actually has to work for everybody. An ecosystem works for everybody. And if it comes out of balance, it always finds a way to get back into balance. So if you built the company like an ecosystem, all of a sudden your people get included, not just these well-intended people that you have these great intentions about making sure they're properly served, but the minute your numbers grow too big, you can't do it. So you go back to trying to get them to do what you want them to do as opposed to working with them. Just because numbers go crazy.
Yeah, that's the toughest part about business is that not only does it like go up and down, but also you get influx of talent. You get, you're dealing with a lot of HR stuff. And I've found that as the business grows, it becomes an entity unto itself. So it's always just kind of its own thing, its own living, breathing animal, and it kind of does its own thing. And you just have to kind of like a ship, kind of steer it in the right direction most of the time. Talk a little bit more about. I know you do a lot of speaking. I know you have a couple different books. Um, what are some of the problems that you see? Because I talk about this a couple different times on the show, like just with people and bad hires. What have you seen? Like, how does that affect a lot of the businesses that you've run into?
Well, every single one of them. I mean, here's the thing. The difference between having freedom in your business or freedom from your business, so you can get some time off, or freedom because of your business, growth in your asset value or growth in your impact, they all come down to literally 50% of the game is hiring smart. So a lot of people, here's the biggest problem. Nobody intends on hiring bad people. But what they do is they actually say, I'll look for the best that I can find at the time and then just live with that because that's all I could find. And what the mistake people make when they're hiring, if they can't find good help, okay, if they can't find real talent, what they do is they start to bring their standard down a little bit, and they bring their standard down a little bit more, and then they get the best that they feel they can afford. And what people don't realize is that when it's hard to find people, that's exactly the opposite to the strategy you need to use. So the only people that I would hire, especially if things were tight, is people who are potential partners and close allies. Now, that doesn't mean that I need to make all my staff my partners, my business partners. But unless somebody is that strong, then I'm looking in the wrong spots. I would look for a different type of person. And one of the things that I find is sometimes paying somebody maybe 15 or 20% more, you get double the person.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that if I throw a lot of money, I'll get talent because everybody will take your money if you do that. But there are ways to figure that out. And I love that you mentioned that because in the book, not only do we have a whole chapter on hiring smart, but the second thing is that attached to that, anybody who does get the book, there's a PDF that they can actually download.
Oh, cool.
That is my 70-page complete guide to hiring. This is exactly the system we use for our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we've laid it, how many steps in the process? What are the questions in this step? What are the answers that you could expect? What does a good looking answer look like versus a bad looking one, and why? Things like that, because literally half the game.
Mm. Michael, if somebody wanted to find you, get some information from you, maybe buy a couple books or hire you as a speaker, where would they find you?
My website is walshbusinessgrowth.com, WALSH, businessgrowth.com, all one word. And if they want, the latest book is called Freedom by Design. And if they do Freedom by Design, Walsh, they type that into Amazon, they'll find it there. We've got the print, the Kindle, and the Audible all up and going.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.